I'm Bill Pierce. I do mostly hand tool woodworking, although I do use some power tools. The types of stuff I like to do most is things that are kind of architectural in nature and also some rustic work. And we're going to be seeing some of that today. This is not going to be a talk about hand tools versus power tools. This is going to be more a talk about a woodworking concept. And that concept is called coarse, medium, and fine. The concept itself was inspired by this video by Christopher Schwartz. This video is available in the library. I'm actually going to take it in a little different direction. He tends to focus more on planes, and I'm actually going to sort of broaden the context to a variety of different hand tools, as well as talk about some power tools. This technique is really all about taking an objective in woodworking, and let's say we're talking about cutting the wood, and breaking it into a series of steps to achieve the final result that you want, where each step that you're going to do is going to use a tool that is specifically designed or well suited to the task that you're cutting at. Whether that's a coarse type of cutting, a medium type of cutting where you're refining and taking away smaller chips, or a fine type of cut where you're using usually a plane and taking away, maybe down to a few thousandths of an inch when you're doing a flattening operation. We're going to do a number of hand tool examples to illustrate this concept. We're going to cut a curve on a board. Next one, we're going to cut a tenon on a stretcher. We're going to plane the face of a board, or in this case actually we're going to plane the face of a half log. We're going to do a little bit of carving and relief and show you how coarse, medium, and fine applies to relief carving. And lastly, I'm going to teach you how to make a really classy saw cut. This technique applies to both hand and power tools. You might do some steps with power tools, maybe some of the core steps the power tool would be really good at. Often power tool, it's kind of difficult to get it to do something very fine without a lot of very precise setup of that tool. So we're going to talk about a little bit about both and how you can possibly mix hand and power tools to do what you want. Finally, after that, we'll review some of these concepts that we've seen throughout the video, and we'll go from there. And thanks very much for watching. The first demo we're going to do today to illustrate coarse, medium, and fine is we're going to cut a curve on a wide board. Fairly common woodworking operation. To do this, we're going to be using three different tools. Coarse tool being the axe, single beveled axe. Second medium tool we're going to use, the draw knife. And the fine tool is going to be the spoke shave. To cut this curve with the axe, we're going to use kind of a basic technique. We'll be first chopping some stop cuts in the axe to sort of catch the splits and actually make it so we can split off bigger chunks. The whole idea of coarse tool is to get off, just remove wood. You're not trying to be real accurate. You're not trying to get a fine curve. You're not necessarily you're not really trying to get a smooth curve, because all that's going to be removed with the subsequent tools. And you can see that it really, a lot of people think a hand tool is taking a lot longer to work with than power tools. But even with a coarse tool like this, you can get pretty close pretty quickly. So the next step is going to be the medium step, and we're going to do that with the draw knife. The goal here is to take this curve that we've sort of roughed out with the axe, but notice that the axe is left, it's kind of coarse and it's not really quite to the shape of the curve, and it's kind of discontinuous in places. So we're going to do what's called fairing the curve, making a nice smooth curve with the draw knife. The whole goal here is to try to get the wood down to the approximate level of the line, which we're then going to refine with the spoke shave in the next step. So, not really using a template here. Since I have a hand tool, I can kind of keep an eye on the line. And get it down close. And there we go. We have a reasonably fair curve now. It's still not the kind of curve that I'd want to show on furniture, so we need the next step. The next step is the fine step. We're going to be doing this with spoke shave. The goal here is to take what was left by the draw knife in achieving the shape of the curve that we wanted and just smoothing it and making a nice surface and making it even more continuous than it was we could get with the draw knife. Spoke shave is essentially a little plane with a short bed. But it's really nice because it does kind of the job of a plane, but because it's got such a short bed, we can use it to make curves. And it does very nicely in curves. Even a flat bottom spoke shave can do some concave curves up to a point. So I've smoothed this out now. I have my curve. I've used a coarse tool, an axe, a medium tool, the draw knife, and a fine tool, the spoke shave, to get a nice smooth curve. Okay, so we've cut our curve here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how you might do this same kind of thing with power tools. I would probably cut a curve like this starting on the bandsaw, and then if it was for furniture and I was trying to do a really nice job, I'd probably have a pattern, physical pattern, which I then pair up with a router with some kind of a pattern following bit. And you could make a very nice smooth curve like that. Now notice that I didn't use a pattern here. Why? What's the difference? Well, I had tools that, at least at the coarse step, I know that could do lots of damage, but by the time I got down to the fine step, the fine tool really isn't going to take a very big shaving. So even if I make a mistake while I'm cutting, I'm not going to make a very big mistake, and I can kind of sneak up on the curve that I want to achieve. Think about, though, what you have to do with the router. You have to use a pattern with the router because a router can either be a coarse tool or a fine tool, depending on how you set it up. The router uses the pattern in order to achieve that kind of a fine finish and fine step, but with hand tools you don't really need that kind of thing. Just you know, a difference. Some power tools can be used both as coarse tools and as fine tools, depending on how you use them and how they're set up. Our next demo is going to be cutting a tenon. Pretty standard woodworking operation. If we were going to do this kind of operation with a table saw, how would we do it? Probably you'd set up your table saw fence, and you'd set up a dado set, and you know, you'd run your piece across, and you'd cut both sides of your tenon, and one and done. So kind of with the table saw, coarse, medium, fine, all in one step. But in order to achieve the accuracy you need, in order to get a good joint fit, you'd probably need to set up your table saw pretty precisely. You'd need to do some test cuts, maybe. That's probably how you do it with a power tool. With hand tools, we can use coarse, medium, and fine in 3 steps. We're going to first use the fact that the grain of the wood is providing some weakness to do some splitting and riving of the tenon. That's going to be our coarse step. Next step, we're going to actually cut some of the wood to sort of refine that step that the coarse riving left behind. And lastly, we're going to use a plane to get our nice fine flat glue surface. So, first step. We're going to use our chisel. The chisel in this case is actually going to be both our coarse tool and our medium tool. The chisel, in the coarse sense, is going to first act like a wedge. We're going to use the wedging action of the chisel in order to split the wood. In the medium step, we're going to use the property of the chisel, that is the edge, to do some cutting. So here's the coarse step. We take the chisel, put it on the end of the wood. Now I've already pre-cut the shoulder of my tenon here, so all I have to do is sort of cut back to the shoulder and cut along this line right here. Not going to do it all in one step, because the danger here is sometimes if the wood is not totally straight grained, then we're going to discover very quickly that the coarse step is going to be a little too coarse. If the grain goes up, it's not so much of a problem, because then I can just come back and cut it with the chisel. But if the grain goes down, I run the risk of going a little bit over my goal. Okay, we're almost there. Now in this case, I'm not sure if you can see this, but the grain is actually rising to some extent. So I started out here, you know, in a couple of steps. I'm going, you know, kind of close to my line. I can get a little closer probably. But notice that I'm a little closer to the face of the board by the time I get to the end of the split than I was at the beginning. It's no problem. I'm going to now go from my coarse step to my medium step. I'm going to use the same chisel to remove that wood at the back that was left by the coarse step. And I'm going to use the cutting action of the chisel. Now I have to be careful here on this outside edge that I may break it away a little bit. So I'm going to first do a little cut along there so that I avoid tearing out the back of this. Using a coarse tool to do most of the wood removal, and then this medium tool to sort of refine that shape. We now have a reasonably good looking tenon. Is it flat to the level of what we would want for joinery and for good glue adhesion? Probably not. So now we go to the fine step to refine that edge, or refine that face. I'm going to be using a shoulder plane here, and I'm just going to go across the grain, right across here like this, and use the fine shavings that the plane gives me to take it down to being flat, and also take it down to precisely where I want it on the line. Looks like I still got a little bit to go up here. So there we are, a reasonably flat tenon face. Now the last thing that I can do, if I'm concerned about making the face of this tenon perfectly parallel to the surface of the stretcher, is I can use my router plane, which is again a fine tool because it's a plane and it has a nice fine adjustment here for the depth of the cut. I'll just use the router plane here with the wings of the plane sort of spanning these two boards of equal thickness, and I can just keep adjusting this downward a little bit until it's cutting uniformly across the whole face of the tenon, and I'll have a nice square tenon. If I leave it a little bit oversized, I can go back. If this is too rough of a cut, I can go back with my fine tool and clean that up a little bit and make it nice and flat. So our next demo in coarse, medium, fine, we're going to learn how to plane a face. I thought just to make things interesting, rather than planing a face of a board, we'd work on something that's maybe a little hard to get through the planer. We'd work on half-round log. And I've done this operation a number of times. I have this piece that I build. My wife likes to call it a fairy tale stool. And as you can see, it involves a nice half-round log. So you can eventually get this down through this technique down to, you know, a really nice plain face on a otherwise kind of rustic surface. The first step, of course, we start with the tree. We start with the log, bucket, and then when I'm processing my my logs, I split them. And if you've got a nice straight grain tree that's grown very straight and tall, the splitting goes pretty well. But in this case, I picked this example because it's one where it sort of went sideways. We have this log, and if you can see this from here, we see that it's really got quite a bit of wind in it. So our first coarse step was actually to do that riving, and for that I used some wedges. The next step here is we're going to have to work on getting rid of this wind that the grain twist in the log has left in the face. The way we do that is we're going to really capitalize on a coarse step because we have quite a bit of wood to remove here. I've drawn my lines on the log to show where I want the cut to go. Two parallel lines define a plane, so these two lines should define my plane on my log. So let's think about this a moment. Now that we've sort of drawn what we want, how would we do this with power tools? I could cut it with a chainsaw. That might be one step. Chainsaw is a pretty coarse tool. If I wanted to then follow that up with something a little more refined, I could probably run it through a bandsaw if I've got a bandsaw that's got a wide enough throat to do something like this. Then maybe I'd take it and I'd put it on the jointer. So really, even with power tools, I'd be using coarse, medium, and fine in 3 steps, using 3 different tools designed for each stage of the work. But we're going to be doing this with hand tools today. Okay, so first step is going to be to use our coarse tool to take off some pretty big chunks to get this into a somewhat flat condition. Notice that I've pre-scored this with a crosscut saw, and you can see sort of along the edge here. Here's the line that I want to get to, and then here, all along here, I've made scoring cuts. When I'm going to be splitting the wood or riving the wood, I don't want the splits to travel any farther than I have control over the split. So doing this sort of pre-cutting is a good technique for having more control when you're riving. So one tool that you can split with, of course, you could use a froe. That's a tool that's made for splitting. But another way you can do it with some precision, just to get especially these ends cut, is to use this nice big chisel and mallet here. And take off a reasonably sized piece at a time. I think I tried to take up too big a piece at that point. If you take a reasonably sized chunk one at a time. See, my cracks started to propagate a little farther than I wanted to. But notice here, look, like I was telling you, this sort of pre-scoring, the crack only propagated as far as that stop cut. Okay. Let's see what we've got here. So, I've started to take off my wood. Been making pretty large chunks. I've gotten it down. We're not really to the line there, but we're still using the coarse tool. So we've done our job. Okay, so the next step is to do some more coarse work. I just wanted to show the chisel is particularly well suited to doing the ends of the log. It's a little hard to aim in adze at the ends, but we can use the adze to do the rest of the coarse work. This is a jig that I've devised for this type of operation to hold the wood. It works very well, especially because you're weighting it down with your own body weight. And we'll just sort of go in from the end. First, really going to focus on sort of splitting some of these chunks off. That's most of the splitting. You can see now that we're getting down to sort of the bottoms of some of those stop cuts that I made with the crosscut saw. So that's telling me how deep we've gotten. So now we can start just sort of smoothing this a little bit using the cutting properties of the adze. But it's doing its job. We're taking big chunks off. We're getting it closer and closer to being flat. Nice big, so we got some chunks here, some shavings here, and we're getting closer. So we'll pick up in just a minute with the next step. We're now going to sort of fast forward for the sake of brevity. I've got another piece here that I've prepared in the same way. This side of the piece is what it looks like when you get done with the adze work. Basically coming right off the adze. Still see some of my my scoring lines, but really the adze leaves quite a smooth, and you can get to a pretty flat surface with it. This side, on the other hand, is something I've been using our next tool, which is our medium tool, the scrub plane, and we'll be using the scrub plane to then bring this even closer to flat. So since you don't see scrub planes around very much anymore, I just thought I'd show this one to you. It's a narrow plane. The reason it needs to be narrow is because if it's a wide cut, you probably wouldn't have enough energy in your body to push it through. So it's a narrower cut. On the bottom we have an extremely wide throat. The sole doesn't need to be particularly flat, but the importance is really the camber of the cutting iron. It's designed to take a dished cut. This is the foreplane, relatively wide throat, somewhat cambered blade, which I'll show you in a minute. We're getting to where we do need a flatter surface on the sole, and this is a Stanley number 5. These are the two irons for the scrub plane and for the foreplane. And what I wanted to show you here, and really the key to why these work and why these are medium tools, is because of the level of camber that you have on the iron. For the scrub plane, you have a very severely cambered iron that makes a very dished cut. And as I showed, it works really well on cross-grain work. For the foreplane, much straighter type of edge on the iron. It is cambered more than, say, with the jointer plane or a standard bench plane. It's still cambered, and so it is going to leave sort of dished marks as it cuts the wood. It's not a final flattening tool. So scrub plane is used at least usually in these sort of first sequences going to the next step. Scrub plane is used across the grain. Is kind of the easiest way to use it. It's really a tool that's built to do its job across the grain. So basically, real coarse tool. We're making some pretty thick shavings here with this, and it's just a matter of kind of working it down. But shavings that thick coming off of it. Goes pretty fast. Again, because the tool, it's a medium tool, it's designed to do this medium job. So let's try moving on to the next step. Just see what happens. So the next step is going to be foreplane. Foreplane is a tool that's sort of designed to be used in this sort of medium to fine kind of range. Where we're approaching flat, but we're not really trying to get to our final smooth yet. Okay, so if we start to work with the foreplane on this piece, and we listen, notice that you're hearing a lot of skipping, and that's as the blade of the foreplane slides over the ridges left by the scrub plane. It's not cutting all the time. You can see the shavings that we're taking off now with the foreplane. They're relatively thick shavings, but a lot thinner than the scrub plane. But you can see if we use this sort of fine-ish tool, it's going to take us a while to get this flat. So I'm going to do an interim step, and I'm going to go back to the scrub plane, but this time I'm going to use it along the grain to get a little more flatness along the grain. Again, because I'm taking such a thick shaving, it should be approaching flat a lot sooner than I could get to with the foreplane. Let's go back to the foreplane. And I can also increase the rankness of the cut on the foreplane as well. There we go. Now we're starting to see. Can you hear that? It's a more continuous cut. We're getting longer shavings as we start to contact the wood. Throughout the length of the cut. And there we go. We're having a little trouble holding the work, so we've added a little non-stick material to the bench to make it a little bit less slippery. Now we're going to go into the realm of the fine. We've used our foreplane, and in this case I haven't gone to complete flatness for this surface for demonstration purposes, but I've at least got a section here which is approaching flat. Before going to this next fine step, which is really a surfacing step or smoothing step, I probably would have made sure that this surface is completely flat. Now I'm going to be using the smooth plane. You'll note that the smooth plane has a shorter sole to it. It also has a blade with a very, very, very subtle camber and a very narrow throat. And it's meant to be used for smoothing, and it's meant to be used to take very fine shavings. So let's sort of go to the next step in smoothing this with the smoothing plane. And you can see we're taking fairly fine shavings with the smooth plane on each step. So we're not really changing the flatness very much at this point. We're really just sort of getting that last final smoothing surface on the wood. And I'm actually going to dial it back just a little bit to show you just how fine a shaving you can take with a smooth plane. Okay, that's a pretty good example. So here we go. This is our smooth plane shaving, and you can see it's pretty translucent. This is alder that I'm planing here, and you can make a pretty fine shaving with that. We started out with a very rough log that was in pretty severe wind. We took care of that with our coarse tools, our mallet and chisel, our adze. We then, once we had gotten that relatively flat with the adze, we took it to the bench here and started working on it with the scrub plane. Then we took our foreplane, and that's the step where we would really try to achieve flatness with this. Then we went to our fine step with the smooth plane, and that's actually given us quite a nice looking surface here. The last step, so that's I think 6 steps to get it to this point. The 7th step is with a card scraper. And where the card scraper really excels is at sort of touching up some of the spots that you may have gotten some tear out with any of the planes. And it also makes extremely fine shavings, because the cutter on a card scraper is probably protruding into the work maybe a few thousandths of an inch. So it makes a very fine shaving. That's the types of shavings that you want to get with the card scraper. We're pretty much there.